I think we're going to start in like 2 minutes.
Okay, let me know because when you want to go live, when you're ready, or when we met, and that's when you have to start.
Oh, okay.
So no one's hearing it at this moment.
Okay.
But yeah, just do a signal to me and we'll start it.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the final day of the IGF. We're very grateful for you all for joining on this very early time start to the Freedom Online Coalition's event on how technical standards can shape connectivity and inclusion. My name is Laura O'Brien. I'm Senior International Counsel at Access Now, and I'll be the moderator for the session today. And I'm joined by an esteemed group of panelists who are very expert on this topic. To start us off today, I will hand the floor over to Rasmus Lumi, Director General, Department of International Organizations and Human Rights from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Estonia to do welcoming remarks. Over to you, Rasmus.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone to this morning session here, which addresses a critical yet often overlooked pillar of our digital world, which is the technical standards. These standards are the backbone of global connectivity, enabling data to move seamlessly across borders, ensuring the interoperability of our networks, and supporting the expansion of affordable digital services. From undersea cables to data transmission protocols, standards underpin the very systems that make the internet work. But this infrastructure is only as strong and as just as the processes behind it. Too often, standard-setting bodies like ITU, IETF, and others operate without sufficient input from the global south, from the civil society, or marginalized communities. This lack of inclusivity risks reinforcing the digital divide and leaving critical voices out of decisions that shape our joint future. We need open, transparent, and multi-stakeholder models for setting standards too, models that reflect the full diversity of the global digital community. In its joint statement of 2024, the Freedom Online Coalition, which Estonia is leading this year, has emphasized the importance of rights-based, inclusive approach to digital policy. And at the same time, Estonia's own leadership in digital governance shows what's possible when innovation is paired with openness and accountability. As we navigate complex issues, cybersecurity, infrastructure, resilience, emerging technologies like quantum communications, we must ensure that standards evolve, not just to meet technical needs, but to align with broader goals like human rights, sustainable development, and global cooperation. Let's use this space today to explore how we can make standard setting more equitable, more collaborative, and more future-ready. By doing so, we can help build a digital ecosystem that is not only connected, but also inclusive, secure, and truly global. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rasmus. Our session today will delve into how open and interoperable standards can bridge digital divides, enhance connectivity, and ensure affordable access to vital digital services in underserved regions. We'll be focusing on the critical role of standards in global communication infrastructure, such as undersea cables, data transmission, network compatibility, and cybersecurity. We will explore how emerging technologies demand adaptive, resilient frameworks. Despite their crucial impact, international standing setting bodies such as the ITU, IETF, IEEE, W3C frequently operate with limited stakeholder engagement. Our discussion today will highlight the barriers to inclusive participation and propose concrete strategies to foster greater transparency, accessibility, and representation. We will also examine how aligning technical standardization with human rights, digital inclusion, and the Sustainable Development Goals can support key WSIS action lines, driving a more equitable and secure digital future. Through expert insights and collaborative dialogue, this panel aims to chart actionable pathways towards making standard-setting processes more open, collective, and representative, building a global digital ecosystem that works for everyone. In terms of the format, we'll do one round of questions from the panelists, and then we'll open the discussion for more of a Q&A from you all. We'll then conclude with the three main takeaways from this session and any other closing remarks from the panelists here today. So I'd like to start off by introducing our esteemed panel. First, to my right, I have Mr. Divine Abekti, and I apologize for any mispronunciation of names, the Director General of Cybersecurity Authority of Ghana. Pleasure to have you. I also have Stephanie Borg Sila, Director for Digital Policy of Diplo Foundation. Great to have you here. And then immediate left, I have Natalie Turkova, at-large advisory committee, ICANN, and founder and chair of IGF Czechia. And then on my very far right, Alex Walden, global head of human rights, Google. And finally, but last but not least, Rose Payne, policy and advocacy lead from Global Partners Digital. So I think we'll just dive right into it with my first question to Mr. Devine. How can open and interoperable technical standards help bridge the digital divide, particularly in underserved regions and among marginalized communities?
Thank you very much. I am honored to represent Ghana at this important roundtable on the role of technical standards in shaping more inclusive, secure, and interoperable digital future. As a nation at the heart of Africa's digital transformation journey, Ghana sees technical standards as governance instrument that impact rights, inclusion, and sustainable development. So firstly, open and interoperable technical standards are foundational to bridging the digital divide. They lower the cost of connectivity and technology adoption, especially in underserved communities. And we have seen this a lot throughout the country, and I'll come to that, especially in our financial inclusion activities. It fosters competition by allowing multiple vendors to interoperate, reducing lock-in and also promoting affordability in that aspect. And it also enables local innovation and adaptation, such as African language support in mobile applications and digital platforms. So for some time now, in our financial institutions in Ghana, many years ago, we only had the traditional banks, for example, and that cuts away about 80% of the population who were peasant farmers, market women, and tradesmen who never had access to bank accounts or never thought there's a need for that. But then the insurgence of technologies and interoperability came in, and locally we were able to develop mobile applications and introduce what we call the mobile money applications. And interestingly, it's not only in Ghana, it's across the continent. So when you go even to East Africa, you have M-Pesa, which is there, and we work with the mobile networks to establish this. In that aspect, everyone is able to put in a smaller code and they're able to transfer money. You can walk to a vendor and then put money into your own mobile wallet and also transfer money to people across the country. So as a result, especially in the mobile money, it has enabled over 80% of the adult population to access basic digital financial services. And by avoiding the vendor proprietary limitations, interoperability has become a driver of that financial inclusion in Ghana. And today I can gladly say that even me, in person, I don't see the need to walk into a bank. I sit even right here in Norway, and I'm able to transfer money to my mother who is right in the village, and also be able to transfer from the mobile wallet account to my brother's bank account, no matter where he is. So these are the way technical standards can help support digital inclusion.
Thank you very much. It's very helpful to have the perspective, not only from Ghana, but to see the regional and bringing in the financial institutions. So that's very, very helpful to kick us off on this discussion today. My next question is to Natalie. What are the main barriers to inclusive participation in global standard setting processes, and how can these be addressed to ensure more diverse stakeholder engagement?
Thank you so much. So if I would look at this through the lens of someone who is focusing on end users within the various roles that I have in the community and focusing on the interest of the end users, well, I would say it's very important to mention that these standards, technical standards, might sound distant or very abstract to many of these people, but they actually do shape the way we all connect, the way we are all online, we communicate, and also access all the opportunity that we have. So this is very important to start with, so that standards really do affect all of us, everyone. But the everyone isn't usually in the room when everything is being said and done and talked about. So historically, we can see that technical standard setting has been mainly, let's say, motivated and being done by engineers, industry, government agencies. And so environments that are just not traditionally open or even accessible, even if you really want to, for everyday users or just public interest advocates. And we can just talk about the main barriers, right? But I would say the main thing is, of course, the lack of awareness, because typically you're not invited. There's no advertisement where all these discussions are being held. So there's no increased participation or opportunities for the end user communities. And much of the work is just being done behind a closed door. And of course, once something goes wrong, then we start to take these discussions again as an open thing, try to resolve what was being done wrongly. However, then of course it's harder to somehow change it. So there is now the growing recognition how the standards are just not neutral, and they can just embed values or affect human rights in a way that we just don't think about, because we don't even invite these people who can pinpoint and tell us in advance that, well, this is actually not the right decision, this is not the right way to go. But then once this is all being said and done, it's just way too complicated to go back and change it. So definitely, if I want to be positive about this, and I want to, not just to make the points of the negative things, in order to change and maybe overcome these barriers, I would suggest strongly that we try and do our maximum to have all these important conversations and be more open to different stakeholders back when we are having all these initial discussions, so that also the process is much smoother and, of course, eventually cheaper. So to provide some space and open seats for those who advocate for end users, who know well the realm of human rights and can really help us overcome these obstacles at the very beginning. These can be observing roles or specifically design seats for these type of people and stakeholders. And then, of course, all these processes tend to be, let's say, very technical. So I just want to mention the language barrier we don't usually think about. So me mainly in my day job, apart from all this, which I love to do, I'm an academic, and I know that sometimes we forget that the language we use can create this big barrier to the normal, I don't like to use the word, but like the regular end user, my grandma. I also want her to understand what is being done, why these things look the way they look, how come these findings can actually affect her in her everyday life, even though it doesn't seem possible. And so that also being able to translate what is being discussed on also the technical standard setting level to everyday end users is very crucial. Otherwise, even if we invite them, but they're intimidated because they just don't understand, they don't want to feel just dumb, and they should not be in the room because they're not engineers, then eventually, even if we open these seats, they will just not come. So also take a step back and try to be more open, more inclusive by design as we discuss all these things. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Natalie. I think that was helpful to get kind of more of the historic perspective, and then also highlighting some of the main barriers, such as the lack of awareness, the fact that these settings are very strongly technical, and the need to center on and advocate for the end users. So I really appreciated that. Perhaps I could piggyback off a little bit more on this, what could be the solutions. I know you offered a little bit a perspective on that in terms of the observing rules, but to inclusive participation in global standard processes, and how can we address these to ensure more diverse stakeholder engagement?
Thank you so much. So, of course, apart from the dedicated seats or just specific roles that we can set up for them, then another thing is that usually to be part of such communities or just the committees themselves, sometimes you do have to pay a certain fee, like a membership fee, to even enter the environment and be able to meaningfully participate. So, of course, if there is a financial barrier as well, this should be something I would suggest we reconsider, especially for those from civil society, and that usually do face the barriers when it comes to finances, and this is usually the main issue. So, of course, I would also advocate for this thing. And then focusing on also some form of vulnerable end users, such as the youth as well. We can see in many organizations, they are now forming youth panels, also bringing these perspectives of the generation that will be affected by all the standards that we adapt now these days. So also bringing these people to the same room and trying to discuss with them what they see as challenging. Maybe they already have some fears. And sometimes when I have these conversations with young people or vulnerable groups of end users, such as people with disabilities. And then, of course, all these groups can merge, right? We tend to forget that. So we can even have young people with disabilities or people from regions where connectivity is just a real issue. And these people have some additional obstacles, additional barriers. So just bringing them in without creating, again, the barrier of language, the barrier of membership, fees, and all these, that could really help. Then, of course, just being able to promote when these things are happening. Also maybe enable some form of virtual participation. Sometimes we can see that once, let's say, a first draft is being adapted, then it can be open for public comments or for comments from all these that could be just in these specific roles seated at the table. So that could be something that could be very helpful eventually. And then, of course, just overall raise some awareness and try and bridge the sphere of very technical, sometimes very hard to grasp, let's say, documents to the end users when it comes to explaining what does it mean, how these things can actually affect them, providing examples, so focusing more on the knowledge enhancement as well. I think all these together in a very naive situation and a utopian perspective, that would be the ideal recipe to overcome some of the obstacles that we see today.
Yes, thank you, Natalie. I appreciate how you took the focus more broadly on the end users and narrowed it down to, the youth, persons with disabilities, looking more about the vulnerability aspects. And of course, we're all, facing, many barriers in terms of access to processes from a financial perspective, but also I think there's ways of overcoming that. And I appreciate your option on the virtual participation. We've seen that work really well in different hybrid modalities, and it's a good way to make sure that we're engaging with stakeholders from all over and to bring them into these processes. So thank you. Next, I'll turn over to Stephanie. In what ways can technical standardization and maybe with respect to digital technologies, communication infrastructure, data transmission, network compatibility, and security, which is quite a bit, be better aligned with international human rights law, contribute to digital inclusion, and advance the Sustainable Development Goals?
Thank you, Laura. I will answer the question actually by rewording it. So I would say that technical standardization can contribute to digital inclusion and advancing the SDGs by being better aligned to international human rights law. So I've turned that a little bit around. And building on what Divine said, there are multiple everyday examples of how technical standards are bridging the digital divide. Divine mentioned the M-Pesa and the financial related solutions. There's the Aadhaar in India, which also is a very similar example. So the Aadhaar has enabled millions to access banking and social welfare, and through the Know Your Customer, the APA standard, it has reduced the onboarding costs for financial services. Another example is the use of TV white space standards in some countries in Africa, and that has enabled broadband delivery to rural areas using the unused spectrum, right? And another example, building also on what Natalie has said, it's accessibility standards, right? So, for instance, the web content accessibility guidelines that have made web content more inclusive for persons with disabilities. I've just taken 3 examples, but there are many, many, many more. But obviously, we need to ensure that these technical standards are aligned with human rights law. I will be stating the obvious, right? So standards should not enable surveillance, exclusion, data misuse, etc. And to prevent these harms, the discussion needs to take place from the outset. So I would say that that is one of the key points, right, to make. If the discussion does not take place on the outset, as Natalie said, then it's very difficult to solve. I'm also reflecting a little bit on what Natalie just said regarding the solutions. Diplo Foundation, we're the lead partner in a project. It's called CADE, Civil Alliances for Digital Empowerment. And one of the things that we've done is we've mapped the barriers for inclusion, for participation, focusing on civil society from the global majority, right? But we went a little bit deeper in the sense that we looked at some of the main standardization fora, and we said, all right, in each of these fora, right, what are the specific barriers? So we went a little bit granular to identify, for instance, what are the issues at the ITU, what are the issues at the IETF, at ICANN. Some of the issues are the same. Some are quite specific to these fora, right? So what we really believe and are working on is for there to be finally some structural changes coming from the top that will finally solve issues for civil society participation. And you mentioned the membership fees. It's a non-starter for CSOs, right? So how can we even begin to say that we need to hear civil society voices when the door is shut for civil society, right? So certain barriers are literally, they're a non-starter for CSOs, let alone being able to speak the same language, understand, etc. But what we're also saying is that so we're trying not to approach it in a, let's say, in a naive way. So there are aspects that civil society need also to look at to be able to, let's say, help themselves, help their cause. And one of the issues that we are working on, one of the aspects is on helping civil society, helping end users, urban communities understand why they need to be in the room. And these are the examples I mentioned, the examples Divine mentioned. These are the everyday things that matter, right? So, CSOs, civil society organizations, they also need to be made aware that their contribution is essential, because what is being decided and what is being developed and later implemented in some of these spaces that we're mentioning affect them directly on an everyday level. So I'll stop there. Thank you, Laura.
Yes, thank you very much, Stephanie. That was very helpful. And I think if you can, or maybe elaborate more on some of the issues that you mentioned specifically within the ITU, within IETF, would you be able to do that?
Yes, of course. So we have the mapping study published on the CADE website. So I'll be happy to share the URL after the session, or we have a CADE booth here. Essentially, there are issues that are like quite similar, right? But for instance, for the ITU, there's the famous membership cost, right? You have to be a sectoral member to participate. There are some let's say, not exceptions, but other stakeholder groups are able to access ITU discussions. Why not civil society, right? So to me, it doesn't make sense that you have huge membership fees for CSOs, and the exclusion, the exceptions, right? They are still very difficult to, let's say, tap into, right? Because of the conditions attached with them. Within ICANN, there are perhaps the decisions on where the face-to-face meetings are held. What we're suggesting is that the location takes into account, for instance, small island states, which are, for instance, in the Pacific, in regions which normally are rendered automatically inaccessible because of the huge traveling costs, etc. So perhaps a change in how the rotation takes place. At the IETF, one of the main challenges is the language, because the IETF discussions are predominantly in English, right? So how about real-time interpretation, right? And we're not saying 1,000 different languages, right? We had a lightning session the other day. We looked at the languages that I'm seeing a couple of people smiling. Probably they were part of the session. But we had this experiment, right, of finding which languages are perhaps the most common rather than English. In the whole space where we organized this lightning session, only I think 1 or 2 persons were English native speakers, right? So English was their mother tongue. For the rest of the participants, it was not, right? So again, interpretation to enable, for instance, there are huge communities in Latin America which are very much interested in the work of the IETF, but the language is a barrier. So why not include Spanish, right, in real-time interpretation? So it's granular issues like this that the mapping has identified in a very granular way.
Yes, thank you, Stephanie. I think this mapping exercise and looking at the specific bodies is very helpful for us to all understand the specific issues within each body and ways to address that. And bringing back to the international human rights law aspect of the question and the discussion today, I think the joint statement from the Freedom Online Coalition that Rasmus mentioned in the beginning on technical standards and human rights in the context of digital technologies could be really influential in trying to address and bridge those barriers. Having a bunch of FOC governments committing to these principles from a human rights perspective is really helpful in advancing moving forward. So thank you for all those suggestions. My next is over to Rose. What role do technical standards play in ensuring the security, reliability, and interoperability of critical infrastructure like subsea cables, which is an increasingly interesting topic? And how can international cooperation and multi-stakeholder partnerships strengthen their governance?
Great, thank you so much. I'm so glad to have a chance to be here with you all. Just before I move on to subsea cables, I'll give you a bit of info to kind of place me. So my name is Rose Payne. I work for an organization called the Global Partners Digital. We work to ensure that laws, norms, and standards that govern technology are, first of all, rights respecting, but also created in an open, inclusive, and transparent manner. So as a part of that work, we've worked in multi-stakeholder venues like ICANN, in multilateral venues like ITU, and we're so glad to hear what Stephanie and Natalie have already said, because we've actually run projects to bring global majority civil society into technical standard setting bodies previously. And I think just to pick up on what Divine said as well, I actually got into this field, first of all, through the kind of financial inclusion as a lever for digital inclusion field. So I'm always really happy when someone mentions mobile money. Bringing those kinds of organizations into technical standard setting bodies also helps from actually a technical point of view, because they can bring the point of view of end users who are in low resource, low connectivity environments, who also may be using older technology. In addition, as we've already heard, the role of kind of human rights organizations specifically is that they can help unpack the impact of protocols or standards on the end user and on the functioning of the open, safe internet. And I actually, to bring it back to the technical community, that does actually drive adoption ultimately. So I think that's beneficial for everyone. So just before I move on to subsea cables, I just want to note that while some of what I say aligns with GPD's focus on human rights, actually I'm mostly drawing on research which I've done previously, including through a fellowship for the Internet Society. So technical standards are obviously really vitally important for subsea cables. So they need to withstand a really harsh environment. They're obviously under the sea, and they're vital to the functioning of our societies. They carry some 95 to 99% of all transnational data. They're built and owned often by a consortium of different companies, and they need to make land in at least 2 countries if they're if they're transnational, and to at least 1 landing station where they connect with terrestrial networks. All these points of interconnection are what make the standards so important. Their position is also necessarily a matter of public record. Ships or people carrying out seabed activities need to know where they are so that they can avoid damaging them. So this kind of combined criticality and vulnerability makes standards really, really important. And yeah, I want to give, again, a shout out to, I believe, Laura, that you might be involved in a body at the UN. So there's a joint statement on cables, which was released. Before that, the European Commission has also released a recommendation. And I think that both of these highlighted the value of working with trusted suppliers in a tense geopolitical environment. And I think it's really worth highlighting the role of standards in not only increasing interoperability, but also in raising trust, not in the least because they obviously increase reliability. But I think that question of trust also kind of reveals the limits of technical standards, if you like. One of the main threats to cables is actually cable cutting. I would like to highlight that it seems that that has been rare. Deliberate malicious actors cutting cables seems to be rare, but it is quite difficult to establish malicious intent because, ships may not, they may be commercial ships that have been near a cable when they've been cut. I think that it won't be news to anyone to say that geopolitical tensions are, however, raising this risk. I do want to give a shout out here again to technical standards because they can help gather the information needed to support resilience and feed information into people who are trying to protect cables. And I'm particularly thinking here about geospatial data standards that help to bring together different types of data which can be used to actually understand risks, if not in real time, in a timely manner. But yes, while I think technical standards are a critical foundation, there is a limit to their effectiveness when it comes to malicious actors in this area. And here, I think that that's where the question of multi-stakeholder partnerships and international cooperation comes in. At the limits of effectiveness for technical standards, you hope that policies provide protection. I think, a lot of these cables are fundamentally international. That means we need international legal frameworks directed at their protection. However, those frameworks, when it comes to cables, are quite out of date. The UN, the UNCLOS was made a long time ago. There have been a lot of efforts to update it. And sorry, UNCLOS is the UN framework which governs the kind of international seabed. And yeah, what those kind of attempts to update that framework have been a little bit slow. I think that, Laura, I'm not sure if you are involved in the international advisory. No, apologies. Maybe it's someone else, sorry. But yeah, there is an international advisory body for submarine cable resilience, which was established in 2024. But yeah, so I think that there is a bit of a policy gap. I think that also because cables are owned and operated by the private sector, but are critical infrastructure for many countries, this means that while the responsibility for repair may fall on the private sector, the responsibility for protection, for trying to prevent cable cutting, is a little bit less clear. Countries are trying to overcome this by forming smaller alliances. I think NATO has set up a undersea infrastructure coordination cell. Navies are working together to try and prevent or at least track cable cutting, but it's just a really huge challenge. So I suppose my point here is that we need cooperation not only between technical standard setting bodies, but also across governments, private sector actors, and civil society. We really can't afford to get it wrong because a single damaged cable, depending on where you are in the network, because some countries really are quite poorly connected. They may only have one cable which connects them to the global internet. Tonga has experienced, for example, repeated complete blackouts due to primarily natural disasters. Repairs are often very expensive and slow, which means that countries can remain offline for quite a long time. And I think that in the situation that we're in today, where subsea cables are essentially the foundation for exercising a lot of rights, such as freedom of expression, access to information, right to privacy, through access to the internet, that is a serious, serious problem. And to go back to that kind of question of language, I think having sat in some meetings of where people are discussing technical standards related to cables, there is really a fundamental disconnection between the way that governments talk about them as this kind of geopolitical challenge and the way that technical standard setting bodies discussing the kind of protection of cables, where in a way geopolitics is seen as something which kind of gets in the way of their work. Mm-hmm. So I think, again, that kind of work of translation between different parts of different communities which are involved in the protection and governance of cables is really, really important. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much, Rose. It's very helpful to narrow in specifically on the undersea cable topic, especially that data, that statistic that's always mentioned about the 90 to 95% of transnational data comes from undersea cables is always something that stands out. And I think you really got to the issue about the trust component in this space, in this discussion that we're having. And I really also appreciated that you mentioned you brought up UNCLOS and the international legal frameworks with relation to undersea cables. While I'm not a part of the body that you mentioned, I have been doing my own research on this topic, having previously worked in the realm of international law of the sea. But I do think, at the point that you also concluded on about the disconnect between governments and the way they talk about subsea cables and the technical standards, and seeing geopolitics as a way that they want to shy away from, I think is something that we need to delve in, especially from the human rights perspective that you also highlighted. So thank you very much for those insights. Finally, I want to turn to Alex. We've heard a lot from civil society perspective, academia, but the private sector has a huge role in this, and I think you will offer some very insightful insights on how ways that the private sector work with civil society and other stakeholders to ensure that there is this human rights-based approach throughout all the stages of the standard development process. So over to you.
Yeah, and thanks so much for including us in this conversation today. It's one of the topics I love most because I think actually it's one of the topics where we have so much alignment across stakeholder groups. Obviously, as folks have pointed out, there are lots of areas for improvement, but I think we generally have a lot of alignment about the need for continued investment and focus here. So maybe I'm going to do a lot of underscoring what other colleagues have said and sort of plus oneing, but maybe just to highlight a few things. I think the importance of the role of the private sector, most importantly, is to continue to invest in connectivity and infrastructure and interoperability among those things. And so that is something that we are doing heavily. Obviously, Google is a major investor in particular in subsea cables around the world, looking to ensure that there is increased connectivity everywhere from Japan, Australia, new cables in sub-Saharan Africa, et cetera. So that's very important to us sort of philosophically and then obviously for our business. And so that is, I think, a really important area of alignment where the private sector is very much aligned with governments and civil society and communities and wanting to ensure that we're bringing connectivity to everyone everywhere. The sort of important second piece related to that is to ensure that we are committed to human rights and implementing human rights frameworks in the ways that we are thinking about doing all of that work. And so for us, we are involved in places like the Freedom Online Coalition, in the Global Network Initiative, and have commitments to the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. And those are important baselines for understanding how we should think about sort of the high-level principles and then also, more granular ways we should be thinking about how human rights impacts there might be human rights impacts as outcomes of some of the technical standards and the ways we're thinking about expanding connectivity. So ensuring that we are thinking about human rights in the context of all of this work that we're doing. And sort of a maybe separate but related point is ensuring that we're engaging with stakeholders throughout that process. I think we are always talking about how technical standards, there's a lot of I think framing that work is neutral, and of course it is not. There are always ways in which there can be rights-related impacts, positive or negative, and so we need to ensure that it is not just folks who are technologists in those conversations, not just governments and companies, but that we have rights experts at the table helping all of us understand what the potential externalities of any standards might be. And so the last thing I'll say on this is maybe just that I think companies, as we are also wanting to ensure that we have a seat at the table for these conversations because we have sort of an obvious and important role in investing and innovating, is making sure that we are always advocating for our colleagues in civil society and human rights experts in particular to be at the table and advocating to decrease barriers to entry for all of the stakeholder groups that others have been talking about. So I'll stop there, looking forward to others' comments, but I think that's, as we have a seat at the table, it's important for us to reinforce the importance of rights and the importance of all of our expert colleagues being at the table to contribute.
Yes, thank you very much, Alex. I think that's helpful to understand the private sector perspective, linking it back to the work that you're doing with the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. And we do appreciate when companies try to advocate for civil society and for others to be at the table. It's really important that we keep doing that in these spaces especially. That concludes the round of questions with the panelists. So I'd like to open the floor to anyone in the room. If you have any questions, I also understand that we have those online. So if you're online, feel free to submit a question, and we'll have a way of getting it back to the panels. Okay.
Hi, I'm gonna be brief. I'm Israel Rosas with the Internet Society. I think this topic is super relevant. I won't touch on anything about standard bodies, standardization bodies, but particularly on the work related to the ITU sector conferences. We understand that there's a barrier to participate there, and that's why we are trying to work with our community to trying to be this link between the information happening in these regional preparatory meetings. For instance, last year we did an effort for the World Telecommunication Standardization Assembly. Our colleagues are attending the regional preparatory meetings, debriefing the community, taking the input from the community, and trying to be this bridge. We are doing the same for this year's World Telecommunication Development Conference. So my invitation at this point, more than a question, is an invitation to strengthen the collaboration with the Freedom Online Coalition, with different organizations. If you are interested in getting involved in the work related to WTDC this year, to the plenipotentiary conferences next year, the WTPF, all these sector conferences, we would really love to work together, because we know that we need to bridge that gap regarding the work in the ITU. Either with our chapters, directly with the organization, we are really happy to collaborate with you, and we can explore further ways after the session. Thank you.
Anyone want to quickly comment on that?
I just want to say that one of the chapters is, in fact, one of the Internet Society chapters, in fact, a partner in the project that we are leading. So happy to take the conversation forward.
Yes, and please introduce yourself.
Hi, this is John, speaking as an individual and having trouble with this thing. Anyway, I'm somewhat disappointed with this panel. One is because you managed to put together a panel about how do technical standards shape connectivity and inclusion, and did not include a single person who actually works with technical standards, as far as I can tell. So this is one of the fallacies that I've seen multiple times in the attempts to so-called bring human rights into the technical bodies, that civil society groups seem to have this idea that they can affect things by standing outside and shouting in, well, let us in, except that, well, the door is open. You're not listening. And as a technologist, I'm an unabashed technologist, I'm part of civil society. I'm part of the people who care about human rights impacts, because I'm a member of civil society. So this false distinction between the technical community that doesn't care and the civil society that cares about all the right things but happens to not understand the technology, this is false. This is not something that is good for progress. So it might be that we should focus on ensuring that the technologists can know about the civil society impact, of course. But don't expect that being outside and shouting in will help.
Rose?
Thank you. And sorry, I'm going to take this off because I can hear myself echoing. Thank you. I completely appreciate your point. I will just say that what I was trying to mention, albeit very briefly, is that actually we have taken civil society into these bodies. We found them, there are challenges. I'm not going to pretend there aren't challenges. I think we've touched on them quite extensively, but we're not saying that they weren't welcomed. We're just saying that there are challenges about translating the kind of different languages. Of course, civil society who specialize in human rights hold a completely different area of expertise to technical experts who are actually working with standards, and finding a way to kind of communicate across those communities is a bit of a challenge sometimes. So a lot of it is about capacity building on the civil society side, but perhaps, just to pick on what you said, we should also be doing capacity building to try and publicize more about what we're trying to do, to try and talk more about how we can actually be helpful to your work. So I take that on board.
Can I add to that? Actually, some language we are trying to avoid is precisely describing civil society as on the outside, shouting in, right? Because that language in itself is already a barrier. But building on what Rose said, and I agree with Rose completely, it's the distinction between technical community and civil society. I mean, it's a natural almost distinction. Why? Because the work that we do every day, if I'm not working in standards, right, I can't call myself a technical person, right? And it's the same vice versa, right? So the categories, right, I think they're very much connected to the work we do on an everyday basis. And it's only natural that I call myself, for instance, a lawyer if I'm working on laws, right? I think the main, one of the main issues is understanding each other, right? Again, it's not a matter of people who care and people who don't. We all care, maybe about different things, and what people like at the forefront of projects, for instance, bringing CSOs closer to these conversations and helping the people leading these conversations understand civil society. We're trying to act as bridges, right, to literally pull down the walls. A lot has been done already. And in the mapping report, far from being, a compilation of barriers or this has to happen, we've outlined also some of the really, really good practices that are happening in some of the organizations I mentioned. So at the ITU, ICANN, IETF, there are definitely good examples to be modeled across the board. So we bring those out also, and it's those models that we know that some of the models work. So for instance, real-time interpretation, we have that here in the at the IGF, right? We know it works, and it is because these spaces are already implementing some of the issues that we're saying, hey, why don't you try this issue? Because it has helped people to get together and to understand each other more. So definitely not trying to, the compartmentalization beyond what is natural, that we are, I think, trying to avoid. But definitely what you said, taken on board, absolutely.
I know Natalie wanted to come in as well.
I just have a little comment. Thank you so much for saying what you were saying. And I totally agree. I don't like these distinctions because at the end of the day, we are all using the internet as end users, right? So just being in these boxes makes no sense. And honestly, I'm a perfect example of a person who has completely random background, having a psychology degree and a media studies degree. But then just organically being interested in some of the aspects that I was researching, I was like, oh, actually, I need to understand the internet more and come more on different aspects of the issue, understanding the technicalities. So I was low-key and slowly educating myself and eventually started whispering outside and be like, can you let me in? I actually have some ideas, but I also need to learn from you inside. And I'm one of those people who somehow managed to get in, but I can name and highlight these obstacles that I faced. So I just want to say that it's definitely possible to be inside, as you use the metaphor, to be in the room, but it can still be quite bumpy road. So I'm more than happy to be here, and I feel like we all can agree that it is definitely possible. It is the way it should be, but still it is not the smoothest way. So I would say this is just my comment for you. But thank you so much for saying that.
I know we're on 5 minutes at time, so I want the next question, please.
Hi, my name is Colin Perkins from the University of Glasgow. I'm a former IAB member and a long-time IETF participant. Just to sort of echo that previous point, I would note that the process for a technical person coming to a venue like this is also somewhat bumpy at times. I'd also, I think, echo Harold's comment that it is a little disappointing, given the large number of people from the leadership of these various standards bodies that you were talking about who are at this meeting, that none of them are included in this panel. Thank you for the interesting debate. It is, you're certainly raising some interesting questions. I certainly agree about the need for inclusion of people from a broader range of backgrounds in the various standards development bodies. On the ITF side, I know the ITF has spent considerable efforts to try and improve inclusivity. For example, it's been providing remote participation in various forms since, I believe, 1992. So there is some efforts going in here. I am, however, concerned that this panel is grouping together the various standards bodies and acting as if they all behave somewhat the same. The models for participation and the membership fees, or lack thereof, in the different standards bodies vary tremendously. The ability to access the final standards, the work-in-progress documents, the ability for anybody to participate in the meetings or not participate in the meetings is wildly different across these bodies. There are certainly some valid criticisms here. I do not doubt that. But there are also perhaps some overly broad statements that have been made which are not representative of all the standards bodies. And I would encourage you to focus your criticism such that it is actionable, and the people developing the standards, the people running the standards bodies can actually help address the problems, rather than making overly broad statements. Thank you.
Thank you. I noticed that we're at time, so I would like to take this opportunity to highlight 3 of the main takeaways that I've noticed from this discussion today. The first involves the barriers. We discussed language barriers, membership fees, the lack of transparency, but I think the Q&A portion also highlighted the understanding each other and including each other, and bearing in mind how these barriers are different across different various bodies. So I appreciate the last comment to acknowledge that they're different in various settings. The second is to build capacity amongst stakeholders. And again, this I think was very highlighted in the discussion amongst government, civil society, technical community, and the private sector. We're disconnected on many fronts, and I think the geopolitical context that we're in does not help in understanding different perspectives and bringing those to the forefront. And of course, in order to ensure that there's access and meaningful inclusion and participation of all stakeholders, we must ground discussions in international human rights law and center international human rights. And I think on a final takeaway, I want to highlight the Freedom Online Coalition's joint statement from 2024 that Rasmus mentioned in the introduction was very instrumental in bringing together those standards. So I believe we should be using that in these processes. And I want to thank you all for joining the discussion today. For listening to the panelists. I want to thank the panelists for their engagement and their expertise on this topic, and look forward to future discussions. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everybody, and a warm welcome to this workshop this morning, which we're going to run through. So, balancing acts, encryption, privacy. Balancing acts 2.0, can encryption and safety coexist? And it's great to see the speakers join us as well this morning. Is David Wright. I'm CEO of a UK charity, SWGFL, and director of the UK Safer Internet Centre. And it's just merely falls to me to moderate this particular session. Before I do give the floor to the speakers, just to introduce themselves and add some opening remarks, just to give a little context around this workshop. So. We're building on the success of the IGF 2024's workshop, which was Balancing Acts, Encryption, Privacy and Public Safety. And so this workshop advances that conversation from conflict to collaboration and solutions. Last year we explored how the weaponization of privacy can obstruct safety measures, particularly child protection. And this year we ask whether encryption and safety can truly coexist and how. So we will, as a panel, be exploring some of the technical models enabling lawful access without undermining encryption. Look at global developments in encryption governance, particularly regulatory and standards frameworks. Tensions between platform accountability, user privacy, and state responsibilities to protect vulnerable groups. So we aim to move beyond these polarized positions and explore how multi-stakeholder engagement can help develop rights-respecting, balanced approaches to encryption policy. That's the subject that we aim to cover. So we will be just running through. I'll allow the panelists to introduce themselves shortly and add some general opening remarks before throwing a series of questions that we have to them. Then there'll be an open floor. We'll be enabling you to ask particular questions of the panelists based on what it is that they've clearly contributed. Obviously, the code of conduct applies to all of us. We have seen some very emotional or emotive subject that this instigates, but please, I ask that code of conduct that the IGF upholds is indeed upheld. So. I'm just going to start off by allowing, the panelists to introduce themselves. I'm going to start off with Andrew.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Andrew Campling. Congratulations for surviving to the final day of our event. I work in the sort of tech space, amongst other things, spend my time at some of the SDOs such as the ITF, and also I'm a trustee of the Internet Watch Foundation, which is focused on finding and removing child sex abuse material online.
Andrew, thank you. I'm next going to throw it to Katie, who's joining us online. Katie, if you can introduce yourself and as well some opening remarks.
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, everyone. I'm very sorry to not be there with you in person. I'm Katie Noizo. I'm from the FBI, and I have been working in next generation technologies and lawful access for the better part of 5 years. And really what that focus is on assessing emerging technologies, emerging and disruptive technologies, and really preparing our environment. I have some really fun portfolios. One of those, of course, is lawful access, and we're going to talk about that today. But I also have the FBI's patent program, which is super fun. We have 26 patents, which most people don't know about our organization. But I also have the group that is involved in our technology standards. So we have membership and even leadership roles in many of the international standards development organizations so that we can be shoulder to shoulder with all of our multi-stakeholder partners from a public safety point of view. So it's a great collaborative space. So very happy to be here, at least virtually. Thanks.
Thank you, Katie. Next, if I can ask Honey to introduce and also opening remarks. Honey.
Yes, good morning. I'm Hani Makola. I currently work for the ICT regulator in South Africa, ICASA, And I am also vice chair of the Study Group 17, responsible for security of the International Telecommunications Union. So I am fairly new to technical work in that respect, but I am very passionate about regulation, of course, as I work for the regulator. But it's important to also highlight that regulation need not hamper innovation, but at the same time, so in this discussion, mainly we want to look at that balance of regulation for protection of privacy, but at the same time ensuring that there is access, especially for the protection of children online participation.
Thank you, Honey. And finally, if I can just throw it to Lloyd to an introduction and opening remarks. Lloyd.
Good morning. Thank you for the introduction. So my name is Lloyd Richardson. I'm the Director of Technology at the Canadian Centre for Child Protection here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. I've been doing this work for about 20 years now. Our organization operates Canada's national tip line for reporting online crimes against children. We also operate a global tool called Project Arachnid, which deals with the removal of child sexual abuse material globally. We see the front lines of harms to children. I've been working in this space a long time. Previously, I worked in the technology sector before intersecting with children in this space, and I'm very passionate about this issue. Pleasure to be here today.
Thank you, Lloyd. It would be remiss if I didn't remark really on the time of the day that both you and also Katie join us. So being 4:30 in the morning, so I appreciate the commitment that you've shown. It's going to be a long day for you. Thank you very much. So I'm actually going to start off with throwing the question to Katie, or actually indeed a couple of questions to Katie. So Katie, just to give you these questions. So what are the real world consequences of encryption on criminal investigations, particularly those involving children, and also how can law enforcement seek access in a manner that aligns with human rights and avoid systematic vulnerabilities? Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, thanks. These are great questions. First, let me remark, Honey, I really loved what you just said, which is regulation need not hamper innovation. And that's probably a great place to start, which is I couldn't agree more. And it's been only the collaboration, honestly, with industries that are involved, even in this space where encryption is now, becoming a challenge, that we've been able to, gain, I'll even call it superiority. I mean, it's only against adversaries and criminals, and been able to bring them to justice, been able to conclude successful investigations because of the technology partnerships and being able to stay ahead, or at least have, some parity with understanding the criminal tactics, techniques, and procedures, and, the methods they're using to turn our citizens into victims of crime. And again, take that very seriously. I think just, again, a quick general statement is that encryption and safety have to coexist. We're here today because they have to coexist. We have to find a way. The challenge is real. And let me kind of explain why. I think sometimes this gets missed in a little bit of understanding. So for those of you who, may be new to this conversation, first, welcome, and we very much welcome your perspective. So we're a very open group here, both the panelists who I've known for some time, but really all of us in this space. There are two parts to the process. The first is where we in law enforcement, we actually need to have predication, and we need to be able to show and, offer that predication to get an order. And so that's the first step in a rule of law country like the United States. It's the first step, is we have to prove to a judge that we have predication to be able to request the information in question or request access to digital evidence. It's the second part of the process where the focus of this conversation and others ends up going. Once we have that order, then what happens? And in the case of encryption, it's really kind of an interesting one, and particularly end-to-end encryption, which is in many cases, when an application or a technology was rolled out, it wasn't end-to-end encrypted. So for sometimes, up to 7 or 8 years, law enforcement had this process with providers where we would retain, we would garner the order through the process, we would present the order, and then we would have the technical access needed. So that two-part process had parity. Now, in the case of deployments, and I think this is the challenge for us, is now we in law enforcement, we know what we're missing. And I can give you some examples. First, let me just state, we're always asked to quantify the scope and the scale of the impacts. We do try to now have a little bit of an understanding of the quantifiable side of this. So we're trying to, and we ask questions of our investigators across all of our field offices on a quarterly basis. Are they facing these impacts and challenges in the cases? And I was able to share that figure, and I'm able to again hear that we're over 17,000 cases impacted. And that's of all manner. It's in all 56 field offices are reporting these impacts. And it's everything, when I say impacts, it's everything from, needing to approach a challenge or approach an investigation using alternate methods, which may or may not be as successful as giving the order to the provider and requesting that technical assistance or access to the evidence that way, all the way to really stymieing or stalling a case because we just don't have the evidence to continue a successful investigation. And one of the biggest impacts that we see year after year is violent crime against children and child sexual abuse material. Let me bring that home to a case. Again, what I told you is in many cases where we are able to see and have access to the evidence, we now know what the cost is when it is then in what we call warrant proof, meaning it is behind the end-to-end encryption with no way to access the content. Here's how critical that is. Many of you have either experienced this in your own countries or you've heard about our cases on sexual extortion or what we call sextortion. We had a very, very prominent case of a young man named Jordan DeMay in Michigan out of our Detroit field office. That individual unfortunately took his own life because he was being extorted by criminals who were perpetrating their crime from Nigeria. Now, we were lucky in this case that the application in question and the communications were available to us. They were not encrypted. And so we were able to see how they groomed Jordan, how they approached him, how they got him to share information. And then ultimately, and this is so key because it went to sentencing, one of these individuals actually goaded Jordan to take his own life and was telling him, you should take your own life. That featured prominently in that individual's sentencing. So it is crucial for seeking justice for these victims, for the parents of Jordan DeMay in particular in this case. But it was crucial for us to understand that there were also over 100 other victims that this crime was being perpetrated against. And that's maybe one of the key challenges on what we're missing now is that we can't stop the harm when we can't actually follow to conclusion a successful investigation in this space. I'll very quickly touch, because I think I'm probably way over some time that I'm allotted here, but I'm very excited for the conversation of what is in the realm of the technically possible. How can we actually find a method, a technical solution where encryption and safety can coexist? We've been very encouraged by some of the research and white papers and throwing things out like homomorphic encryption, looking even at prospective solutions where it's a little bit like a wiretap, if you're familiar, which is from this point forward with the order. Now we'd only be affecting the architecture of the single subject for who we have predication. So I think there's a lot to discuss in this space where we could find comfort, we could find observability, an ability to audit, ability to really look at what we're doing in law enforcement and be able to view those processes, but also ensuring that we're enabling the access that we want to make sure that we can stop the harms, conclude successful investigations. I'll stop there, knowing that hopefully we're going to have a little bit more of this conversation later. Thank you so much again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Katie. Yes, we shall now move it on to. I'm going to throw the question next to Andrew on my left. Andrew, in actual fact, there's two, perhaps three questions here. So I'd ask you, how do privacy arguments become weaponized in standards development forums? Which is the first question. What are the barriers to greater diversity and child protection representation in standards setting bodies? And then perhaps finally, as just a supplementary question, are there any examples that you could share that might demonstrate good practice to us? Andrew.
Yeah, thank you for the questions, David. So firstly, in terms of how do privacy arguments become weaponized, and I'll broaden it to say not just in standards development organisations, but sometimes in other fora. As David said in his sort of opening remarks, it is an emotive topic. Whether we're talking about privacy or child safety, both of those are emotive topics. So sometimes that in itself makes a useful discussion challenging. Sometimes, though, we do have examples where the phrase privacy is used to close down a meaningful conversation and just use as the reason to not do something. And it may be a good reason, I hasten to add, but I think it needs better explanation than just we can't do that because privacy. I think you need to unpack that and say specifically why, and then if it's in an SDO, for example, dig into the specific technical reasons and understand whether they are indeed valid or whether there are solutions. So there may be a technical solution, and there often is, that will give you both privacy and child safety. In reality, they don't need to be in opposition. And in fact, in some cases, actually, if we talk specifically about encryption, inadvertently, the use of encryption to improve privacy can sometimes both weaken privacy and security. And there are some current examples where metadata is being encrypted to improve privacy, but some of that metadata includes, from a technical point of view, what are called important indicators of compromise. That gives signals to your firewall or your enterprise security software that a system has been compromised by malware. And by encrypting that metadata, you may actually be open to attack. So ironically, you may be losing your privacy because of that encryption. So I think we have to be careful sometimes that we don't blindly do things for good reasons without fully understanding the consequences of those reasons. I'll give you a different example. We know from research that the big so-called end-to-end encrypted messaging platforms are widely used by offenders to share child sex abuse material. There's extensive research with an enormous sample size. Last time I checked, it was over 60,000 paedophiles were in the sample, explaining what tools they use, and these are the tools they use to share their material. And again, often the conversation on, well, can we do anything about that, is closed down straight away because we can't do anything with end-to-end encryption because of privacy. Whereas, in fact, there are techniques you can use to block the sharing of at least known material without the need to weaken encryption, without the need to create backdoors. There's something called client-side scanning can be used, which doesn't affect, as I say, the strength of the encryption. There's absolutely no need for a backdoor. And ironically, many of the messaging platforms already use that technique for user convenience features. So it's already being employed in the software. So people that object to it in principle possibly don't realise that it's already in the software that many of us use. So you can do that without, as I say, affecting encryption or privacy in any way. The only time you impact privacy if it turns out that someone is trying to share known illegal images. But then, to be frank, and this audience will understand this, you'll understand that privacy is a qualified right. If you are doing an illegal act, then I think it's reasonable that you might at that point surrender your right to privacy. Your second question, David, what are the barriers to greater diversity and the representation of child protection groups in standards bodies? In fairness, I think, to be more specific, it rather depends on the standards body. So, for example, there's a number of us here this week from the Internet Engineering Task Force, or that participate in that. There are no barriers. Anyone can attend. You don't have to pay to attend remotely. You obviously have to pay to attend in person. And by the way, the remote tools for attendance at the ITF are fantastic. So you attend on an equal basis to the in-person participants with access to the mic cues, the conversations, and so on. That said, and some of the other SDOs, there are other barriers, like you have to be part of a national sort of group or pay to participate and so on. So it depends on the SDO. There's whether there are specific intentional barriers. There are other barriers, though. So the cost, there is a real cost to attend. The ITF, for example, we to try and diversify attendance, we meet in different parts of the world, rotate each time. So there are pretty extensive travel costs, hotel costs, and so on. There's also the cost of people's time. Not only do you have to commit to attend the meeting, so if you attend in person, you're committing to attend for a week. With any of the SDOs, you typically have to attend for a while to understand how the system works and to engage with it effectively. So you're usually looking at a multi-year commitment to effectively engage. And you obviously need to bring relevant knowledge. So just wandering in off the street, as it were, would be quite challenging, I think, probably in any of the SDOs. Having said that, it's absolutely an important thing to do, because any of the SDOs can always benefit from better diversity in their attendance. So again, I'll refer to the ITF as my reference point. We have fantastic representation from the tech community. In my view, we are appalling on gender diversity. And need to do significantly better there, and we absolutely would benefit from better representation from groups with experience outside of the tech sector, whether that's network operators, or whether that's civil society groups, regulators, governments. And if we had that broader representation, we would have better standards. And I believe that's true of all of the SDOs. So please, if you've got the right sort of knowledge level to be able to engage, please do so. It'd be very worthwhile. And then final answer, why would it be worthwhile? Well, as an example, parental controls are probably the one tool that parents have to try and manage, if that's the right word, the user experience that their children have. But we know that there's so many of them, and even technical experts struggle with the parental controls because of the sheer number of them on any given device. You've got the sort of the operating system level controls, the application controls, maybe your ISP's controls. They're all different. They don't interwork. They use sometimes the same terminology to mean different things. And I have had a CTO of a technical organization tell me that he struggles with the parental controls, and he certainly has enormous technical competence. So it's a problem. Where we can use SDOs, some of us are working on a proposal to develop a protocol so those parental controls can interwork. so they can exchange signals with each other, so that you don't have to invest time in every single one of them to put reasonable controls on your device. And if anyone's interested in that, let's have a conversation afterwards. But that might be a useful thing that we can do, where the civil society can actually input useful knowledge that isn't currently present in some of the SDOs.
Andrew, thank you very much. We're next going to turn to Honey, and so Honey, your two questions. So how should encryption policy address regional diversity, particularly in the global south, where technical solutions may be harder to implement? And what are the regulatory models that show promise in balancing safety and privacy? Honey.
Well, thank you so much for the question. And I just want to pick up a little bit on what Katie said. And I completely agree that encryption and safety are not mutually exclusive. And Katie's feedback also highlights the importance of international collaboration, with the example that she mentioned from Nigeria. But to make encryption policies work together, we need to think about how diverse our starting points really are, especially in the global south. As you said, we have the example of South Africa, where I come from, where cryptography providers have to register with the state. And then you also have Mozambique, where encrypted documents must be decrypted by experts. So those examples show that countries are really trying to balance the safety, privacy and capacity, but just in the way that fits their own local context, that whether this is wrong or this is right. But the main point is that they are trying to have a certain balance. And then in the global south, we must also take into consideration that we have limited local infrastructure, including data centers. And this also poses a challenge, forcing some of the countries to rely on external resources for data storage and processing. So when we talk about global encryption policy, for me, it boils down to three things. Flexible policy frameworks that support diverse paths of implementation, and at the same time also respecting the sovereignties of the specific countries. There's a need for investment in local capacity, especially for regulators, law enforcement, and the technical community as well. Boris mentioned the technical work involved, and I believe that meaningful participation of the global south in technical standard setting is very important. So we're not just adapting to decisions, but we are helping shape them. That provides a real opportunity while we're trying to build capacity and technical skills and capabilities at the same time. But in the end, the encryption policy will work if it doesn't reflect, it will not work if it doesn't reflect the diversity of the different regions. And in terms of the second question, what regulatory models show promising balance, safety and privacy, I'm assuming that is still with regard to the global south. So I think the most promising regulatory models are the ones that enable law enforcement access without weakening encryption or undermining the user trust. Frameworks in my country, South Africa, Nigeria, and Brazil require that access to encrypted data be granted only through judicial authorization and based also on clear legal criteria such as necessity and proportionality. So this ensures a balance between law enforcement capability and the protection of fundamental rights. While South Africa's legal framework incorporates judicial oversight and provider registration, there is still definitely room for improvement. We need greater clarity in terms of the obligation on cryptography providers, alignment with evolving international norms also. But I do believe that we are on the right path, but there is still room for improvement.
Honey, thank you very much. And just by way of final contribution, going to throw it to Lloyd. And so, Lloyd, from your perspective, if I can ask, how does strong encryption affect the fight against online child sexual abuse? And secondly, as well, what safeguards are needed to ensure child protection is prioritised in encryption debates? Lloyd.
Yeah, thank you. Firstly, I would agree with all of the previous colleagues. It aligns with everything that I was going to say. I like to encapsulate it by saying it's not necessarily about banning encryption, banning this cipher, et cetera, et cetera. It's more about the responsible use of encryption. So I think there was a statement before about the weaponization of encryption. And I think we can point to real examples of that in the world where we see, for example, Meta used to have just client-server encryption in place related to Facebook Messenger. There was an enormous amount of child sexual abuse material being traded in that way. They were able to prevent it from being distributed and disseminated. They chose to turn the lights off with that. That is an example of irresponsible use of encryption where you're seeing a lot of harm being created and you're essentially turning a blind eye to it. So in a lot of ways, when we're talking about media distribution in adult sort of contexts, I think there needs to be methods by which we can identify child sexual abuse material specifically in a media sense. But there's also areas where we see children being affected in terms of adults communicating directly with children. So that touches on some of the examples Katie gave earlier about where adults have access to children on the internet by way of a platform not delineating children users or turning a blind eye to what is obviously a child user and an adult user. They intersect with terrible consequences. I can echo what Katie said about we've seen a handful of suicides here in Canada for the exact same reasons. Our tip line deals with dozens of sextortion requests every single day. And the idea that we would turn down so that's sort of the perverse weaponization. If I'm industry in this space, that's a cost center for me. If I can turn on end-to-end encryption and avoid any sense of moderation, it's cheaper for me. It makes more sense to approach the situation that way. So I really see problems with that where we need to look at where encryption can be applied in a responsible way. I would use examples that we see in the brick and mortar world in terms of what we see with the financial institutions. So certainly if banks decided they wanted to have financial transactions completely end-to-end encrypted from point to point, that would be a great scenario for people to perform money laundering. The reason that they're not allowed to do that is because we have regulation in place saying, no, you may not. You can use client server in this space and you must inspect these communications here. That's what we've developed. We've learned lessons over time that if you don't do that, you're going to have problems with money laundering. And it's the exact same thing that we see on the internet, yet we've been incredibly slow to regulate in this space and apply the appropriate technologies where there's a balance of safety and privacy.
Lloyd, thank you very much. Now, what we're going to do, clearly we're going to open the floor for particular questions. Before I do, I'm just going to turn to my colleague Boris, who's compiling or is watching the online comments. So, Boris, if I can invite you to the microphone, if there's any particular questions that we've seen online that can be addressed to the four panelists.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody, dear moderator and panelists. There has been a lovely discussion in the comments, and thank you everybody for your contributions. I'm going to try to convey this the best I can, so please help me. First one was, is it possible to create an encryption protocol that balances personal privacy and national security without compromise? The second part as well was a question, did not know about the FBI standards work. Is FBI, which organization is it working with? There has been a couple of comments on ITF, so I'm not sure whether these are correct or not. Please correct me. But ITF waives fees for NGO participants, one contributor said, and decisions are made remotely and physical participation is not required. Thank you so much for that, if that is correct. There was one question in regards to parental controls, which I think might be interesting. Perhaps maybe governments, and kind of suggestion from a contributor, could fund better development of parent and child-friendly protective tools for free deployment on widely used systems. I think it was an interesting perspective. As well, there were kind of questions and comments depending on the contributions and Andrew's contributions of kind of examples of privacy concerns that get weaponized. If there's any, is there any that you could share, dear moderator? I hope that is enough. And if you would care to ask the panel. Thank you so much.
Okay, Boris, thank you very much. We'll have a go at answering some of those questions before we just open the mic. So I think there was an easy one as well. Katie, if there was any information around the organisations that you work with that you referred to?
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad to hear the interest in that. So yes, so I'll just give a couple of examples. The first is in the International Telecommunications Union. Honey, I love seeing you as study group 17. We're involved in the study groups there from all manner. In fact, we're just getting into the artificial intelligence study groups there and trying to keep pace from a public safety point of view. So we're in ITU. In ICANN, Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, that manages the domain name system. If you're not following that group, we actually have the co-chair of the Public Safety Working Group is from our organization. And that's really heavily focused on really stemming and making sure we all collectively understand DNS or domain name system abuse. And then also accesses to IP addresses to be able to make victim notifications. How's that process working? You know, again, is there a observable law enforcement access system being applied to access some of that information, and how are we doing that in the collective? So those are two kind of prime examples of where we're very involved in the standards organizations.
Thank you, Katie. So the other questions, I think, Andrew, I'm going to turn to you here. They're particularly the ones to do with the encryption protocol and also parental controls points as well. So if you can take both of those.
Yeah. And I'll maybe briefly touch on one of the others. So on the encryption question, there have been proposals put forward where you can have encryption, but still have, I think, to respond specifically to the question, governmental access to the encrypted content. I think it'd be perhaps understating to say that I think there's some skepticism as to the appropriateness of that approach. Not my area of expertise, but I think it was one of the proposals was called the Ghost Protocol, but it has been criticised as effectively providing a backdoor that could be exploited by sort of bad actors. So there are issues with that, but they're happy to provide more information of that online. I think on the fees for the ITF, I wanted to mention on that, you can participate online with literally no cost, no financial cost at all. There are no question fee waivers for remote access, unlimited without question fee waivers. There are a small number of fee waivers for in-person attendance, but you need a very clear justification because ordinarily you've also got airfare costs and hotel costs to pay, and there's no funding for that. So you'd need to clarify why you needed a fee waiver for the registration fee if you can afford to be present anyway. But for remote access, totally free. Somebody also asked if I had any examples of weaponized discussions. I do, but I don't think it'll be appropriate to share those because we want to keep this as a constructive discussion. Did I miss one? I maybe. Sorry, parental controls and government contribution. I think that would be a good conversation to have. Equally, it might be a good conversation to have sort of governments reviewing the operation of parental controls and maybe at least getting involved in the discussion about the usefulness of having a protocol so there could be some interconnectivity between those controls. Some standardization there, I think, would be hugely welcome.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, if I can now if I can just ask you to introduce yourself as well, and if I could ask you to keep it to a couple of minutes, that would be good. Thank you.
Sure. Hi, I'm Warren Kamari. I spend most of my time in the IETF, and I'd just like to thank Andrew for noting how open it is. I also want to amplify his message that we need greater gender diversity, but also participation from regulators, civil society, etc. As people have noted, it is free to participate remotely, and our next meeting is July 19th to the 25th. If you'd like to participate, come chat with me. I'm happy to help you figure out how to get started.
It's in Madrid, by the way, if anyone in Europe wants to attend in person.
Thank you, Warren.
Hello, so my name is Simon. I'm a student here in Norway, and I wanted to ask the panel their perspective on this, as my view is that if we start doing these things as allowing governments to access encrypted communications, and yeah, you can say we do client scanning and only on an alert of child sexual abuse or anything related to that, I don't see how this won't harm things as journalism, as if a government turns corrupt, how can journalism keep communicating and stay safe for communicating and criticizing the government?
Simon, thank you very much. Okay, I think we'll take each question in turn. So, Andrew, do you want to? Yep.
I'll offer maybe a thought on that, and hopefully some of the other panelists will as well. So thank you, Simon, for the question. Specifically on client-side scanning for the sharing of known child sex abuse material, there are a number of ways that you can insert controls. So, for example, you can only accept the hashes to get to the specifics from a trusted flagger. You can cryptographically secure the hash file that's being shared to protect it from being interfered with by a badly intentioned third party, including a government. Ultimately, though, I think we have to be honest that if there is a government with bad intentions, there's perhaps other tools that they have, other levers they can use anyway, and there's maybe not technical solutions to that. There are other solutions needed, but I think you can put some safeguards in to protect against that abuse. And again, happy to have a longer discussion offline in the interest of getting more people. But great question.
Can I extend if there's any response to that, Katie, Honey, or Lloyd?
I'd weigh in by saying there's a little bit of confusion of throwing in the government automatically there. There seems to be the automatic distrust, but in the examples we're talking about, it's more the man in the middle being the person in industry who's doing the intervention there in terms of data, which doesn't automatically mean the government is decrypting and looking at anything. It's incumbent upon the company to share that information with the government, likely based on a judicial order, depending on what country you're in. So it's a sort of a hypothetical based on a particular government in a particular country. So it's hard to answer it really specifically. But what I could say in the context here, I don't see that. I don't see the government as the interceptor of anything there. It's industry who's doing it.
You even got a round of applause there, Lloyd, as well.
I was going to weigh in real quickly on that one too. Is I think these are good points, and that's I think part of our reason why we're asking for this technical assistance. As I said, there's a two-part process. One is for us getting the order, and then serving that process right to a provider. But I think that's why it's so important to have the provider in the mix of these, processes, because there then is a check and balance. I think one of the challenges for journalists worldwide is that, I think Andrew was saying, there are all manner of tools used against them. And by the way, that's part of our protective mission, is to ensure that we're protecting, right? One of the things about privacy that I think is interesting is when you define privacy, if you look at a lot of the terms of service for a lot of the providers who are providing these services, it it wants you to be free from harassment. So that free from harassment in your example where you're saying there's harassment coming from potentially an authoritarian regime or any other manner of exploitation there, it's how do we protect against that? And that is one of the reasons why for us in the FBI, we're so keen to, I think, have the partnership and collaboration with the process of the orders that are provided to a provider, and there's another party that can offer some checks and balances and make sure that they're only delivering what is actually covered in the order. When we start getting to other techniques like computer network exploitation or hacking tools or things that are used against journalists regularly, that's where I think you get into this ungoverned space where those accesses are you no longer have any of those checks and balances. So it is a really good question to ask, a really good point to make that, there are structured processes versus unstructured processes and why we favor finding the solutions here in a collaborative manner with the providers to ensure that there is the ability for auditing and for some controls around this.
Thank you, Katie. Okay, if I can turn to the next question, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Tapani Tarvainen, here representing Electronic Frontier Finland. But my background is at the university. I'm a mathematician in computer science, so I think I understand these techniques a bit. First, a quick comment on client-side scanning. I have studied the idea a fair amount, and I really don't think it can be done safely. There are lots of problems. I'll just mention one that hasn't been come up. It basically means installing a software on everybody's phone, and that would be an irresistible honeypot for all kinds of bad actors, notably including intelligence agencies in countries we really don't want to have listening to our talks. But I was intrigued by the mention of homomorphic encryption. I think I understand how that works. I know what homomorphism is, and I don't see how it could be effectively used here. All the proposals I have seen seem to be based on either misunderstanding that simply don't work, or else in effect amount to breaking or circumventing encryption. And whether you are like in client-side scanning, you are actually not technically breaking encryption, you are circumventing it, but the effect is the same. So in particular, I'd like to ask if you have a concrete implementation or even theoretical paper that opens up how homomorphic encryption could be used here, that actually has a testable code, or even theoretical paper, because it's too heavy to be run on a phone at the moment. And the solutions I've seen effectively amount to sharing the key, breaking the encryption. And to save time, it's the same question about differential privacy, but I won't go more deeper in that. Thank you.
Thank you. So just before I open it to the panelists, so we do have apologies from one of the panelists who was actually going to be talking about some of the technical solutions. So Arnold is not able to join us today. So I suspect, although I am clearly going to open it to panelists, that the question about homomorphic encryption was one that Arnold would have probably have taken. But equally, I do open that floor up. Andrew, you?
Yeah, I'll pick up the question on client-side scanning. And perhaps it's a great question, because I think perhaps we need to have clarity on specifically what we mean and how it could be done. So what I'm talking about is, let's say WhatsApp. I'll pick on that purely as an example. The actual code in WhatsApp does the client-side scanning. So not a, let's say, government-supplied piece of software. That would be, as the questioner said quite rightly, problematic to have a third-party software. So it would be the application provider that installed the functionality. And by the way, if you think that's just a problem in principle, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, it's already in your phone. An example of that, and again, I use WhatsApp, but it applies to other messaging apps. If you type in a URL in WhatsApp, unless you've disabled the functionality, it will by default sort of produce an image of the landing page within the message when it's sent. That's client-side scanning. It's looked at your message, the actual content of the message, worked out that there's a URL there, it's actually fetched that from the relevant site. I believe with WhatsApp, it's actually in doing that. By the way, it shared your IP address. So if you're concerned about privacy, you might want to think about that. Whereas if you do client-side scanning of images, so to be clear, what I envisage is not scanning your message at all, only scanning any images, any files that you may wish to include with it. All you're doing on the client is turning the image into a number. So you don't need to know what the image is. You turn it into a number. All you're, if you like, sharing, if you like, is comparing that number to a list of known CSAM material. So my view, and again we can debate this afterwards, is there are no privacy implications with that unless there's a match, at which point. If you are sharing known CSAM, I think you've surrendered your right to privacy at that point anyway. But yeah, we can continue that discussion. But I think in that specific implementation, there isn't a concern with a third-party piece of software. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on that or on the homomorphic encryption point.
I was going to exactly open it to so Lloyd, Katie, Honey, if there's any response to those questions.
Yeah, I definitely want to weigh in. I've been watching the chat, by the way, and thank you for putting your comments in there and your feedback, as we're having this discussion. And I really want to take up sort of like, how do we find some compromise here? I know that the people on the panel and the people in the chat and the people who are in the audience do not want children to be exploited. They don't want child sexual abuse material, and all of us want to ensure there's safety there. So let me open just sort of, and please you can throw it in the chat, and I hope I'm not breaking any protocol here with the panel, but I'm just interested. Like we've been really trying to figure out what's a workable way forward here. We've been interested in reading papers about abuse-resistant law enforcement access systems, for instance, and things that are, trying to build trust, which has to be a key here. And we're, I understand the criticisms of the FBI. We all understand them, and we want to earn the trust. And so we can only really, I think, do that if there are these processes, right, where there are orders involved, there's some manner of, auditing, there's some manner of transparency around these processes. So I wanted to put forward this idea of that we had heard before, which is looking at this prospective solution. Yes, I'm the first to say it's not going to resolve all of the challenges we have with access to digital evidence that we have authorities for. However, maybe it's a starting point for these conversations, which is if we're looking at a prospective solution, what I mean by that is it's kind of like we give the order to a provider who is managing the encryption already. That's what these companies do. And they're doing all manners and sorts of things around that encryption, like patches and other things. And I know some of that is different. But if we looked at a prospective solution where we were then only affecting the architecture of a single user with predication, is this something that could be perceived as workable by folks on all sides of this debate and conversation? Is this a starting point for a true technical solution that provides, kind of the assurances that folks are looking for, can build some trust, but then also at least restore some of the access that we already had? And I do think that gets missed in this discussion, is that for many, many years, some of these platforms did not have a full end-to-end encryption solution. That gets added later. So that access has been impacted without a solution in mind, even though there's, again, global recognition about the authorities. So I'm just hopeful that this conversation can come out of the back and forth on this is why we should have no, and this is why we should have all, and where can we meet in the middle? And I've really enjoyed listening to the other panelists here talk about, some of these proposals. So I'm very interested in hearing, more discussion around that. Let's maybe stop with, and I think Andrew threw it out, the no's and the weaponizing of that it can never happen, and find that space in the middle where some of this can and should happen. And I'd love to take up fully the discussion of homomorphic encryption. I agree there are challenges at scale. It's also, I think the use case there is more for narrowing based on characterization than it is for really decryption. So I'm with you on that, but I think there's some promise around if you established a homomorphic model up front, some of the opportunities. But again, would very much like to engage in some discussions with more technical folks. Over.
Thank you, Katie. Lloyd or Honey, any remarks?
I was going to touch on the example that Apple pretty much fully built with neural hash. It was a couple of years back, and then quite quickly threw in the garbage. It was audited by external folks. It was a complete example of how you can do client-side scanning. I'm not saying that I particularly favor such a solution, but it is a potential solution to addressing child sexual abuse material in the environment. And it actually, I would argue that it actually sided on privacy more than child protection. But again, better than nothing, which is where it is now.
Thank you, Lloyd. Perhaps that is a starter for the conversation that Katie's called for too. Okay. Sorry, Honey, if you would like to.
Yes.
Yeah, please.
Yes, not necessarily on the specific comment. There's some comments on the chat that I would like to maybe respond to a little bit, if I'm allowed.
We just a minute, Honey, because we can't actually see the comments. Boris, are there? I guess it's difficult to know what the comments are that Honey, can you actually introduce what the comment is that you would like to specifically respond to, given that we can't see those comments?
Yes. So maybe just weighing in first on the one that was asked by one of the audience on the government involvement, which we all heard. I think it also boils down to what we discussed last year in this very panel on the issue of geopolitics when it comes to international law and how it can pose a challenge. So that question basically speaks to the different governance structures that are there, and we really need to find a way of working around it. But for me, I think it boils down to the importance of why judicial authorization is important when granting government access, and also the clear legal thresholds that needs to be defined in legislation or policy, and the transparency mechanisms also need to be embedded in such policies. That's the first one. And then there was a comment by Ian saying that the Electronic Communication Transaction Act by South Africa has drawn a lot of criticism. And yes, I do agree that he is right. It has drawn criticism, particularly regarding clarity and alignment with global practices. But that said, I'd just like to mention that I believe South Africa is on the right path. And as I mentioned, judicial oversight and provider registration are already embedded in the framework, which is an important step in balancing rights and security, which the workshop really is about. Yes, there is definitely room for improvement, clear obligations for providers, like I said, stronger procedural safeguards, and better alignment with evolving international norms. And that's the beauty of policy in the space. It is constantly evolving, and regulators also need to be aware of that. Yes, those are the questions that I wanted to respond to. Thank you.
Thank you, Honey. We may well just come to Boris, you just as after this next question, so I'll just line you up for that one. Please, thank you for waiting so patiently as well.
No problem. My name is Vinicius Fortuna, and I work on internet access, resilience, and privacy at Jigsaw. And thanks for this important conversation. I think, unfortunately, it was a little bit one-sided, so I wanted to add another perspective. So like Katie mentioned predication, but like with the big South Typhoon hack of the US telecoms, they leveraged the wiretapping infrastructure that is being promoted here, and that put citizens at risk, including governments and children. And predication didn't help us there, didn't protect us. Andrew mentioned weakening of security due to hidden indicators of compromise. So I want to point out that like you can only use indicators of compromise after you've been compromised already, and maybe you were compromised because you're not using encryption. But it can help in some cases. But like I'll mention end-to-end encryption. I want to actually be constructive, offer some ideas, and first is that like we need to understand that end-to-end encryption is protecting the channel. You can still see the data on the endpoints, and it's being brought up here. So I can run like malware protection or parental controls. I actually use encrypted DNS with malware protection. And parental controls, I think, is a good solution, but it needs to be improved. So I think that is work that needs to be done. I think that's a good suggestion. And on investigation, like the victim has the access to the data, right? So you can work with the victim to try to get the criminal because they can give you the data. So that's another idea. And then there are some new encryption standards that are helpful. For example, there is Privacy Pass, which was actually developed at the IETF, that allows you to make attestation and prove that you can have some property in a privacy-preserving way. So you can do age verification in a privacy-preserving way, which I think will be really helpful. And last thing is that even when we use HTTPS, the domain names are still in plain text. With AI, you can actually tap into like your child's school Wi-Fi and collect the domain names and create like a profile of your child, and then use that for targeting and extortion, which is scary. And so we need to adopt standards like encrypted DNS and encrypted client hello that will hide that information and make them safe.
Vinicius, thank you very much for those questions. And I'm just going to open that. Andrew is...
Could maybe go to Katie first, because I think she might have something to say about Salt Typhoon, maybe. I think she's better informed on that than any of the rest of us, if she wishes to comment.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of discussion around that. You know, the lawful intercept, it wasn't actually the vector for attack, but the information was accessed. So it is absolutely something we're concerned about. And another panelist or another person in the chat, sorry for us to keep going back to the chat, but there's some great discussion going on there. There was a question asked to me of, is the FBI concerns around, encryption and what we're asking for. And absolutely, that's why we are, I'm standing here before you today saying we are not against encryption. We're not against end-to-end encryption, but we also recognize there is a balance here. And that's one of the things where, we're really trying to have this conversation with all of you and with each other, because we haven't had these conversations before, which is what are those solutions for balance? Again, I know all of us are committed to doing better about stemming child sexual abuse material. So what are those solutions? What are the ways that, and again, I understand you're absolutely right, making sure that victims are able to have an easy way to report and preserve the evidence to be able to report it. But the challenge for us is that, the victims are sometimes not even in the mix as far as, and with extortion, of course, there's a lot of challenges, or let's just say, because, if someone takes their own life, or again, if it is perpetrator to perpetrator, we want to make sure that we're identifying other folks, and that preservation's a tough one too, to ask people to preserve their own evidence and put the sole responsibility only on the victim and user. So your points are right. Don't mistake me. They're great ideas, and want to hear more of those. So I've been very excited to hear the interventions here. So keep them coming. But yeah, with Salt Typhoon, we are very concerned. That's one of the reasons we're very huge proponents of making use of encryption. But I think it is worth noting that was actually not the attack vector. Again, it may be neither here nor there for you, because the lawful intercept information was accessed. And again, we are all about protecting that in a better way ourselves as well.
Thank you, Katie. Andrew?
Yeah, two very quick, and they'll be a bit superficial for time, so we can maybe speak afterwards. On the indicators of compromise, two quick thoughts. One is, yes, encrypted DNS is useful to protect from a third-party observer, but you are sharing your data still with the resolver operator. Some of those resolver operators are maybe in operating under regimes where there's not a very good privacy regulation. So assuming that just by putting in encrypted DNS, you've fixed privacy, which isn't what you said, to be fair, but some people might just assume you do that, you're done. That's not true. You've got to consider who's operating the resolver as well. Otherwise, you may have bigger issues. And then also on the indicators of compromise, the issue is with things like ECH, you encrypt the SNI data, and that's absolutely used by firewalls and other software to identify when you have when an exploit has happened and when maybe data is being exfiltrated. So I think we need to be very careful, and some of the people that are working on that were maybe a bit focused on encryption and not so much on the broader security ecosystem, if you will. But that's probably a longer conversation that we can usefully have in the next 7 minutes, 21 seconds.
Lloyd, or Honey, did you want to add anything on? Okay, we can move on. I'm now torn. Sir, please do ask the question. Boris, I will come to you next. We have only 7 minutes left, so we probably will run out of time for further questions, but please.
I'll try to be brief. Vittorio Bertola, I think I know most of the people in this conversation. And I mean, how many times have we been having this conversation at IGF, at the ITF in the last 10 years? I think like 20, 30. So and every time there's someone that comes and says, I mean, rightfully, I mean, if you do this, it will be abused. It will, I mean, whatever system you put to intercept, to give some lawful interception possibilities, may be abused or will be abused. And this is not the point. Unfortunately, there is a part of our society, in politics, in civil society, in public institutions, that thinks that even if it will be abused, it's still better than not having lawful interception. So the problem of this discussion is that it is really a political discussion of balances, of compromise. And I think that the compromise might be very different depending on which country you're from, when you live. There's how big is crime in your country, whether you have organized crime or you don't. So, I mean, allowing lawful interception in Norway is going to be very different than allowing it in Iran. So this is why, I mean, I'm starting to think that maybe we could focus this, I mean, the development of this in another direction, which is maybe, okay, every country will decide this at the political level, but if you decide to do this, can we find ways to prevent the bad effects from spilling over to other countries that decide they don't want to do this? And what's the best way of deciding this and of managing this? Do we have any advice for governments that in parliaments that still decide that they want to do this in terms of safeguards, in terms of technical ways of doing this? So maybe this could be a work strand that could be more productive than just restating the arguments every time. Thank you.
I admired the question as well, but I guess if it was an easy thing, then we wouldn't be recycling there. It would have been fixed. So I think that recognises the point, Andrew.
Yeah, great point, Vittorio. Can I just maybe build on that slightly without addressing it, because it's a complex solution. I think if I extrapolate that a little, I think it's worth stating that, in my opinion, the status quo is just not acceptable. And the reason for that, and maybe a stat we probably ought to just remind ourselves, because it's really important. If we look at child sexual abuse material, tech-facilitated child sexual abuse and exploitation, the current estimates are that there are roughly 300 million child victims annually. That's roughly 14% of the children across the world, which means every country, probably every one of us, we might not know them, but probably we've got sort of people close to us that are victims. So it's the sheer scale of the problem that unfortunately has been enabled by the internet, which is why I feel that we need to find a solution, but to Vittoria's point, accepting that there are trade-offs. We have to do this with accepting there are trade-offs and maybe try and minimise the risks of those trade-offs, but they will exist.
Thank you, Andrew. Lloyd, Katie, any response to that?
I think it was a really good point, actually, and I think that if we continue down this road, you're going to see a sort of split as nation states declare their sovereignty on the internet. It won't be that one unified thing anymore. You're going to see, well, if you're not going to come to this sort of standard because this is a country of law and order, then you're going to start seeing fracturing happen, I think. So I think it's a really good point that you can't compare. It's not a fair comparison to say what's going to happen in this country will happen in this country. We absolutely need these protections in place. We can't just stick our head in the sand and say, well, nothing we can do about it. We absolutely need to do something. And I think the risk here is the fracturing that we're going to see after the fact if we don't address this issue to some satisfactory sort of level.
Okay. So in the last couple of minutes, Boris, if we can, I'm now intrigued with all the conversation that apparently has been going on online. If you can summarise that in less than 2.5 minutes, that would be much appreciated.
That's not going to be possible. I just want to say thank you so much to everybody online as well for contributing. It's really difficult to follow some of these discussions because there's points going left and right, and please read them afterwards. I hope there's going to be recording. An interesting point has been raised, and I think that just showcases the point of this discussion in setting up a future discussion to have more diversity in our future panel discussions. And I think it's an important point to make, and many of the contributors online, I feel as well, would be great. One of the questions that was, I don't know if it was missed, what's the perspective of the panelists on the civic space impact of weaker privacy standards? There are good reasons, that's the comments on kind of privacy reasons to use one sort of applications or other. Then there was a comment as well, high privacy technical standards are not kind of banning police investigations in more traditional ways and other technical investigative techniques. There was a diverse discussion online, and I just want to say one more thank you to everybody who contributed, and please keep on sending them. Thank you.
Okay, well, in the final 1 minute, I think it would just fall to me to pull this to a close. And Boris, I will start with a thank you to you to trying to summarise all of that. I think we've heard clearly a lot of the course of the last hour and a quarter, and there were some notable quotes. Katie, I think is actually one of your first comments, which was encryption and safety have to coexist. We have to find solutions to this, despite, as the question said, it is, we keep coming around to this subject. It is clearly quite a difficult and complex issue, but one that we, Lloyd, as you just kind of reminded us, one that we have to resolve in some manner. And I really like the suggestion actually to focus in one particular place, and that's where we perhaps will start. I thank all of you for joining us this morning, as Andrew said, on the last and final day of the IGF. But if I can just close, if you can show your appreciation to what is an extraordinary panel. Thank you all so very much. Thank you.
is about this small. Welcome to this panel. My name is Sölve, and I'm head of education and media literacy at TENK, which is the media literacy department at faktisk.no. I'm together here with two of my colleagues to other projects, and we are going to present for you how we work in Norway to include youth into public discourse. And first of all, it's important for me to say that this is no silver bullet. It is cooperations together with different initiatives, and these are some of the examples we will bring forward to you. Faktisk was a fact-checking organization established in Norway in 2017. And shortly after that, we saw there was a huge need in schools to have media literacy. And those who were working with fact-checking was journalists. And we saw the need of being more connected to schools as well. So all who works in TENK, which is the department I'm head of, are teachers, so we know how to talk to kids and young people, and we see the need of connecting media outlets and media information to the classroom as well. So we started in 2019 with Tenk, developing learning resources and connected to the curriculum in Norway. And we are really close connected to news that is published all day. We know that from at my age, we started with this editorial media, which was usually, but we see more and more today that we have those social media, and the information is coming rapidly to young people, and often it's really short, and it's maybe not that balanced as media could be. And the challenge is to show young people that when you're on TikTok or other social media, you need to know the rules, what is happening there.
Is about this small.
This up. Huh?
If we look at that video again.
So in 3 seconds, your attention should be caught, and then in 30 seconds, everything should be explained. That could be hard, and often young people have the challenge to see the nuances in there and trying to find the differences between it. And sometimes it could also be the way that they believe that, okay, no, I know everything. We also see that a lot of young people have a hard time finding the source of the information. Many times it could be that way that they just don't know that they have been watching news or watching information. We also see on other social media, for example Snapchat here, that different sources are connected. And then you don't know what kind of sources you are using, and you can't tell the difference from them. That you might have some sources that could be reliable, but other sources that might have an interest behind the information. What we saw in Norway, what is happening more and more, is that young people, they are using social media. This graph shows how what kind of social media they are using, and what we see is that the feed is getting more and more visual. It's not text the way it used to be. In that way, it's not that easy to fact check it, and often it's not right or wrong. It's more that you need to know the narrative behind it. And also what we see is that a lot of young people also get their news from social media as well. So in that way, we have to understand that we cannot go with a pointing finger and tell young people, you need to stay away from social media. We need to educate them so they understand the rules where they are meeting the information. This is an example just before the war started in the Middle East after the 7th of October attacks. And we saw a lot of videos sharing this, saying that the war has started, that Israel has invaded Gaza. But this was videos that were shared online, and it was actually a couple of years ago. But in social media, you don't see this. And for a lot of people that are sharing this, they don't know that this is old videos. In this way, you need to talk with young people and tell them, okay, where do you get your information from? Also, when you're talking about social media, and you need to understand that there's different accounts you have to check. Then you can tell what kind of information it is and if it is reliable. We know that feelings are really strong in the news landscape we see today. This was one of the first photos that was published in Norway after that Russian invasion in 2022. It was this lady who stands in front of her house telling that the Russian has bombed her. Soon after, this poster posted on X asking, could this be really true? This woman was bombed back in 2018 as well. It was really strange. She was a drama teacher. Someone says maybe she's an influencer. And this way of making questions towards news and information is really effective. And it could be hard for young people to understand if this is true or not. And then you end up that nothing can be true. And then you're really vulnerable for this and misinformation. But it's not only war that can be a challenge. This one is a video from the Met Gala last year showing what is going on in New York, where all the celebrities were gathered to show some trends.
Shopping moments from the 2024 Met Gala. The Challenger's actress first hit the carpet in this black and blue striped gown by Maison Margiela. The look totally nailed the Garden of Time theme with its grapes, feathers, and hummingbird accents.
That gorgeous smile, the front of the dress, chin down.
So besides this, it's really clear that she might have some back problems. You can see the tone, you see how it looks like, and then you don't hassle at all when you see these pictures showing Selena Gomez wearing this dress or Rihanna wearing this one, although I've been growing up in northern part of Norway, so if she'd go out in this dress in the sea, she would probably get like far away up in the ocean. But anyway, and this dress also totally nailed the carpet as well, but none of them were at the Met Gala. These are all pictures created by AI. And young people don't understand this. And we know that among young people and on social media, click and sharings are as money. We have to remember this one. And often we forget that we need also to address those challenges that young people meet, not only 45 white men. This video was shared showing, this was before they have shared what kind of support they have in political opinions in the US. It is also edited by AI. But young people don't know how to do this, so we need to show them the tools. How can we verify pictures and videos when you don't know if it's true or not? That's why we are traveling around to schools in Norway, also sharing lesson plans online, learning them how to do reverse image search. This is quite easy to do, but if you haven't heard of it, you can't do it. And this way you can maneuver the information landscape and find the correct video and know the context it's made in. So then you know how to get the correct information, because a vital part of having free speech is getting the correct information. And if you should get the correct information, you need to have the tools. And then you can find that this is the original video, how it was made. She didn't have a Trump banner at all. But when we're talking about AI, it's not only the pictures and the video, it's also the AI bots. And for young people, we know that it's easy to open yourself to a bot, because that's not a person that makes you embarrassed. The problem is who is listening on the other side. And even though you know they are AI, you kind of forget that. So when all your friends on Snapchat has gone to bed and you're sharing all your inner thoughts, that will be shared and remembered forever. And what will happen the next time you have troubles and your information is shared for someone who wants to make money on your feelings? What we do in Tank is we are creating lesson plans that is answering to the news as it happens. So after the Ukraine war started in 2022, we were with lesson plans 3 days after the invasion. We also address social trends on social media, like this, what I eat in a day. We also created lesson plans to those as well, because those trends might be challenging for young people when they don't know what is behind the trend and how does it work. We also need to build knowledge about, for example, AI. This is a package where we learn young people how they can what is behind AI, because there's a lot of young people in Norway that are using AI for schoolwork, for different tasks they're doing in their everyday life, but what's behind and how it works, they don't know, because we haven't created stuff yet. And we say, okay, when everything is done, we will create something. So we need to create stuff that might lose the date sooner or later, but we need to go out there and show them the AI pictures, the AI movies, and so on. We also work with librarians as well. This is Quest for the Truth, it's called, and it's traveling around to libraries in Norway. We at Tank, we can change the examples on those screens. So all the time, this is an updated exhibition that librarians can invite young people to the library and show, okay, here you can learn the last news, here you can learn some new techniques. Those stations have like reverse image search, how to spot AI, how to understand algorithms, and so on. Because we have to remember, there's only we can't be the only one who's sharing this information. We need to build an alliance together with others, like librarians, like social workers, teachers, and so on. So all the time we are sharing, and also we are cooperating with different other projects in the media. Here is a workshop with the teachers at the school in Norway, and all the time we are publishing lesson plans on our website, tenk.faktisk.no, and we are also having visitors from schools, teachers, and so on at our office in Oslo. And we also have our TikTok account where we share knowledge so young people can reach us straight through their social media, because there needs to be adults in the room. And we know by research that young people want adults to be with them, not as a surveillance, but more as like a talking partner. And you don't need to actually be a really cool TikTok teacher. You need to open the conversation and share your knowledge, so then you can meet the young ones. Because we have to remember, if there's a Home Alone party, everyone know how it looks like when we come home.
My name is Katarina, and I used to be an influencer. I started posting TikTok videos and YouTube videos during the pandemic, and my audience quickly grew to a bit more than 100,000 people. I posted fun fact videos in Norwegian every single week. And I spent a lot of time working out how to adapt my content to the TikTok algorithm to maximize my likes, my views, and my shares. Today, I am a journalist and I work in the NRK, the Norwegian national broadcaster. And I work with I work in the news department, and I make explainer videos for young adults. And in my current role, I often reflect on how I shaped my content to fit the algorithm when I was an influencer. Because when we talk about social media today, we quickly arrive at the topic of polarization. Extreme views get the most engagement on social media. Creators who shock us or entertain us or scare us or surprise us, they get the most views. And maybe that's because the algorithms that are designed to give the users what they want actually end up making creators more extreme in their presentation or in their views or in the way they express themselves or even in their beliefs. When I was making content on TikTok, I quickly realized that I had to amplify and exaggerate my facial expressions, for example, to get more views. And I got more views if I presented my content in a more shocking way or a more sensational way than I would normally do. So my online persona became a sort of character in the TikTok matrix. It was still me, but it was an amplified version of me. And why did that happen? Well, because it worked. It got me likes, it got me engagement, and it got me followers. People wanted that larger-than-life storytelling and interesting content. And so I continued to shape my content to fit the algorithm, and in that way, the algorithm shaped me. Parts of my personality were still in my content, but a very enhanced part. And I didn't even realize that that was what was happening when I was making content. On social media now, this type of content isn't necessarily the type of content that would be doing very well. Now, the trends are more authentic content rather than this larger-than-life content that worked a few years ago. But that's the thing, the trends, they change really quickly, but so do the content creators. They are very, very good at adapting their content. And it might not be like this for every content creator, but for me, getting thousands of likes and comments and new followers every week became addicting. Opening my mobile phone and having thousands of people praise me, it definitely stimulated some sort of reward center in my brain. And when that's taken away, or when you get less likes than you expected, that feels very disappointing. And it might even feel really stressful. And adding the layer of earning money on all this as well, well, it's really easy to start chasing the likes. And then it's really easy to start adapting your content to whatever works. And that is an addiction. So how does this attention addiction affect how content creators make their content? Maybe the hunt for online recognition isn't that harmful. Maybe it just makes the content more energetic or colorful or creative. Maybe it's not a problem that I changed the tone of my voice or that I exaggerated my facial expressions. Maybe it's not a problem that I added elements of surprise or humor or did everything I could to get my message across in a way that stimulated the algorithm. But what if the algorithms push people to exaggerate their political views, or their personal beliefs, or their religious thoughts? What if you gain more followers by provoking a little, or by being controversial? What if the comment section explodes every time you offend someone? What if altering your own views give you more likes, or when lying gives you attention? How does it change us? What happens to public discourse when we have this reward system? We might get influenced by more extreme views, and we might get the impression that these views are the norm. The middle ground shrinks, and we might feel like we disagree with people much more than we in reality do. We all have our own feeds and our own individual understanding of what's going on. And our worldviews are in many ways shaped by what the algorithm chooses to show us on these platforms, and by who we choose to trust. Unlike editor-led media, where editors hopefully try to be balanced with what they present, the algorithms on social media are often tuned to just give us more of what we already like. So if I like football content, I might have a lot of football content in my feed. And if I like Andrew Tate, well, I might get a lot of his content in my feed. But I might never be exposed to alternative viewpoints or hear the other side of the story. That leads to echo chambers where people's viewpoints become more extreme. As an influencer, I experienced firsthand how easy it is to gain people's trust online. I was a 20-something-year-old living in a one-room apartment. I had no academic background, but I was making fact videos, and people trusted me. People followed me, and they became attached to me and my TikTok persona, and nobody was fact-checking what I was doing. Most of my followers were young. I had thousands of comments and hundreds of thousands of likes. I had many more teens viewing my content than many of the big Norwegian outlets had at the time, big Norwegian news outlets had at the time. And what I said, just as a private person, was often just accepted as the truth. That's a huge responsibility for one individual. And that's a responsibility that many content creators carry. So what happens to democracy when young people spend more time listening to influencers than to journalists and politicians? Who do we trust? And how does this shape our elections or our ability to collectively act during crisis? We can't rely on people getting important information from influencers who again rely on their content being spread by big private tech companies. We just don't know enough about how these algorithms work, and we might not notice when these algorithms change. It might feel like the content we see on these platforms is organic, but it's not. It's owned and it's controlled by big private tech companies. We noticed the changes when Twitter became X and when Elon Musk made some drastic alterations. But what if similar shifts happen gradually and over time on other platforms? How will we notice that we are being shaped by the content? How would we notice that when we're all already viewing different content? I ultimately made the conscious decision to leave the influencer world and to join a national news broadcaster, as I was, and I still am, concerned about what happens if trust in editor-led media declines. In my job in NRK now, we try to find ways to meet young people's needs online. They want a lot of the same as adults do. They want to know about wars, they want to know about politics, but they want it delivered in a different way, and they want it on different platforms. And my job in NRK now, as a journalist, is to make short-format explainer videos for young adults. Our target audience is people between the ages of 17 and 30. And me and my colleague Ole, we make videos every week explaining all sorts of various topics in the news or current events. We make videos about Gaza, about taxes, about elections, but also about dating and plastic surgery and other trending topics. When something big happens, we are quick and we get an explainer video out within hours. We want to make complex things easier for young people to understand. We want to be constructive and give them context, and we want to make it easy for them to follow the rest of the news covering. We publish videos mainly on our front page, nrk.no, but we also film them so that we can publish them on TV, on radio, and on social media. And when we publish videos on social media, our main goal is to let our target audience know that we exist. We have to accept that the media landscape has changed. The infinite flow of information is the new normal, whether we like it or not. And we still need to reach young people with safe and constructive and fact-based news. And they need to know and understand the difference between an influencer and editor-led media. And that's why we need to have two thoughts in our minds at the same time. Because even though there are good reasons to be aware of the shadow sides, we must not ignore the good sides of social media. People can speak out, build communities, stay connected, they can learn, and they can experience and express themselves in ways that were not possible before. This is especially important for many young people. And there is a lot of value in having the opportunity to share your views without having to go through editor-led media first. For many people, a TikTok video or a Snapchat story is their way of participating in democracy. And we must not underestimate how important that is. TikTok is an important news source for young people. And for many under 20, it is the most important news source. NRK, where I work now, has made the decision to start posting news stories on TikTok again. And even though I've spent most of my time here now talking about the negative sides of social media, I think that responsible figures posting news content on social media is the right decision to make when trying to reach the younger audience. TikTok is an open platform in Norway, used by a large number of young adults. Out of the different social media platforms, TikTok is the most important source of news for many young Norwegians. As long as they are on TikTok, we need to inform them, give them content they can trust, and we need to show them that we, an editor-led broadcaster, exists. We need to be aware and skeptical of how the social media algorithms work. But that does not mean that we must leave these platforms and leave the youth there on their own. We must offer trust, clarity and context in a chaotic media landscape.
Hi, my name is Ada. I'm a journalist in Feven Ung, which directly translates to Feven Young. Feven is a regional newspaper in the south of Norway, and in the fall 2023 they started the Young Project. Through this project, all high school students in our area gets access to our newspaper. They get their own digital subscription. And we're 3 journalists who work in the project full-time, and our job mainly consists of 2 things. 1, we make targeted news, or news targeted towards young people. And 2, we visit the youth in their classrooms and tell them about journalism and what a journalist actually does. This project is a non-profit and it's funded by local businesses and foundations who also believe that the students should have access to their local news. So why do we do it? I'm going to talk about how we do it, but first I just want to tell you a little bit about the background. As Katarina and Sølve has already said, Young people don't relate to news in the same way as before. They navigate the landscape containing an overwhelming amount of information. And even though we're a local or regional newspaper, most young people didn't have a connection to us. They didn't know who we were or what we did. One thing, and they didn't engage in our debate columns. One thing is that they didn't write their own opinion pieces, but a lot of young people also didn't want to be interviewed, even in stories that were about things that were important to them. A lot of them said that they didn't want to be interviewed because they didn't know enough, and therefore Feven figured that they should have access to their local news. So that resulted in them gaining access. We're at 8 schools now, and all students in those schools have access to their own subscription. Do we do this because we believe that the day they wake up and they're finished with high school, they'll pay for their own subscription? No, but we want them to know that we exist and why we exist. And we want them to understand what journalism is. And then we hope that one day when they're 30, maybe they will be willing to pay for news. We don't believe that it's enough to just give them a subscription. Therefore, an important part of this project is that we, the journalists, we travel around to schools and talk to the students. We spend about half our time doing that. And then the other half we spent on making targeted journalism. On our news site, or on Feven's site, we have a dedicated section labeled Young, where we feature stories on topics that are important to them. This is a small section of both articles and opinion pieces. And as you can see, it's entirely young people who are front and center. Too often we think adults speak on issues that directly affect young people. And that's something we're trying to change. We want young people to carry the stories and be the main sources in matters that concern them. And if they don't speak up about the things that are closely tied to their own lives, we lose valuable perspectives. And it's also about taking them and their experiences and their everyday life seriously. This screenshot is taken in May, which is when the graduation celebration period in Norway is also known as russetid. And a lot of the stories that you see here are about that. It's a major celebration that lasts for several weeks, and if you include all the planning and fundraising, it lasts for years for a lot of them. So in May, this is one of the topics that we write the most about. For instance, we traveled to the biggest celebration festival associated with this celebration and reported from there. And for us, it's important to cover both the fun and joyful sides of the celebration. Down to the right there, you see one article that's about a group that won a prize at this festival. It's a feel-good piece and one that might not have been written if we hadn't actively chosen to prioritize this kind of youth-focused content. There's another story there with 2 boys in the picture. The headline translates to "It clashes with exam prep, so many in the class sold their tickets." And this is also a story from that festival, but which captures the atmosphere there, but it also brings attention to an ongoing political issue in Norway, the timing of final exams during this celebration period. Creating articles is not enough, we think, so we spend a lot of time on social media and creating social media content. We aim to be a serious and credible source on the platforms that they spend the most time on. So almost all of the stories we also make for TikTok. And the youth recognize us from there. That's where they see us and they get to know that we exist through seeing us on social media. This is an example of one of the article series that we have made. It's a project where we visited all the cafeterias in the different schools that our project is on. We tested the food and we spoke to the students. We made summaries of the prices and interviewed students and cafeteria staff. Each cafeteria visit got its own article as well as a social media post. And in the comments, the students really engaged. They asked, when are you coming to my school? And they discussed which school had the best cafeteria. And also when we're out on schools after the publishing of this, they ask us about it. They say, we saw you were there. Why haven't you been here? How was the food there? And they're engaging. It's not only about asking the youth to participate in the articles we normally write. An important part of this is to cover the topics that are important in their life. Every high school student in Kristiansand has some sort of relation to their cafeteria, and most of them are there every day. Then the other part of the project. One of the most valuable aspects of this project is the classroom visits. Teachers can book us to come and talk to the class about journalism. The introduction course mainly consists of two things. We talk about journalism, what a journalist actually does, and then we also talk about the importance of participating in the public debate. Many students don't know what a journalist is or what we do, so we come in to explain and teach them about source criticism, fact-checking, media ethics, and what our work actually consists of. The second part focuses on debate and the importance of participating in public discourse. We run exercises that help the students practice expressing themselves. One example is that everyone gets a table tennis racket with a green side and a red side. We present them with different statements that they show whether they agree or don't by showing the red side or the green side. The statements might be things like public transport is inadequate or all exams should be graded anonymously. In this way, everyone gets to express their opinion and take part in the shared exchange of views in the classroom without actually having to say anything. In some classes are very, very quiet, and then other classes can hardly stop discussing after we had this after we do this. But even in the most quiet groups, we often find that doing this kind of exercise a few times help them feel confident enough to finally or eventually speak up, and the discussion starts after a little while. We also create custom programs when schools request them, for example, theme days or when students are working on a specific topic. One of the photos here, the one on the right, is the one on the left is from a theme day at a school this fall, focusing on fake news and the US election. We brought several other people from the office with us, including our political editor. This is something we do quite regularly. We bring other journalists in, so the whole office is involved in this project. For instance, we've taken crime reporters to classes studying law and sports journalists to sport classes to make the content more relevant for each group of students. And then the second photo there is from a visit to the newsroom. School classes can come by and see how we work and where we work and greet the journalists. So, a little bit about the results. So far in the project, we've met thousands of young people. A total of 3,380 students have created a user on FNNO, and the number of students that are on the schools that we are at is a little bit over 5,000. So that's quite a big part of them. We've had 170 of our introduction courses or class visits, in addition to many other sessions, including a debate training for more than 600 students. We've also published 150 opinion pieces from young writers. This is a photo of some of them. They cover a wide range of topics, but these are voices we might have never heard otherwise. Voices that offer different perspectives and raise issues that are often absent from traditional opinion sections. A lot of these posts is about, in one way or another, what it's like growing up today. Some of the headlines include, you were cool if you beat someone up, kids today aren't really kids, and remember that mom and dad aren't always right. Yeah. So, what's next? We don't have a stop date for this project. We continue for the next school year, and we plan to expand on more schools. We get very good feedback from both students and schools, teachers, and others, and we share our experiences with people who want to do the same. So now the project is spreading. Multiple other newspapers in Norway are starting up their own young project. Yeah.
Well, then we have some time for questions. If there is anyone who wants to take questions, the mic over there.
Hi. Okay. I read my question, but my English no is good. My question is from Katarina, specific. My name is Fiorella Ferrari. I am from Peru, and my organization Hiperderecho. We work to ensure that people can access information safely and friendly. They use technology, include digital media. Yes. TikTok is currently the platform with the greatest reach and go Peruvian zone. In April next year in Peru, we'll hold presidential and congressional election. Yes. In this context, but the platform, the TikTok, and in this context, influencer, yes, we play a significant role the public debate, yes. But the Peruvian really it's quite different from the Norway, yes. But that's why I want the question specific. Do you have a specific strategy in place to prevent online violence? For why? Because you have your public face, yes. You're a woman, EX positive in the platform. You have a strategy, but for the prevention violence in TikTok. This is the question. Sorry, my nose.
No, if I understand you correctly, you're asking in a way how I protect myself. Yes. Well, it's very different in Norway than than it sounds like it is in where you're from. But I do get when I was on TikTok, I did get death threats and hate comments and things like that. But for example, where I work now, I have people taking care of it if that happens. But the threat really isn't. It doesn't really exist in Norway. So I'm sorry, I don't have any good.
Don't worry.
Any good advice there? Yeah.
Yes. But we can add that sometimes it's really good to be a part of a team.
Yeah.
So, for example, you always get those comments in the TikTok feed, and have someone else check it out, for example, so you don't feel the threat that close. Could you?
Yeah, and for me, I've contacted the police a couple of times if I've been worried about what sort of threat it is and if it's a real threat. And luckily, it hasn't been anything that's been dangerous for me. But we have systems that work very well to protect us. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Thank you, and I apologize. I was late, so I missed the beginning. But I have 3 questions, and you don't have to get at all of them. I don't expect that, but I'm happy to learn about your work. I do kind of in the same line sensibilization work in my context in Geneva. And I was wondering first if you encountered any differences as you go to different schools, different socioeconomic backgrounds, to the effectiveness of your work depending on those backgrounds. Something I find is usually the more richer schools, I have a much easier time doing this work, and the places where it's most needed, usually less effective. So any advice on that? Second, I was wondering, since we're here at the IGF, what do you tell to students who have no idea what it is and who do not even treat the internet as an object of political discussion and mostly treat it as entertainment? Do you have some, what do you tell these students? And I forgot my third question, but I'll stop there. Yeah. Thank you very much for your work.
Ada, maybe you can say something about different schools?
Yeah. I'm guessing it's not that big of a difference here as maybe other places when it comes to economics and those things. At least not in Kristiansand or in the south of Norway. But what we find is a good thing about being in the schools is that we also reach different kinds of youth. We reach the whole class, and it's which is students from all different backgrounds. So by being in the schools, we reach those that we probably wouldn't have reached with just giving them the subscription, for example. Yeah.
So we also find that something that's very important is to make content with people and not about people, especially when trying to reach different minorities.
Yes, and our project, which is seated in Oslo, we have to say that this difference between those who have much money and less money, but as they said already, you need to go to those different groups and talk with their language in the eye height. Is there another question over here? Or no? You have a question, yeah.
Hi. Hi. My name is Johnny Erlings. I'm from the Dutch Ministry of Justice. First of all, thank you for having one of the few panels with a clear, concise solutions to information integrity problems. So thank you for that. My question is, I'm really happy to hear that youth is still interested in hearing news, but they have to navigate through so much content. How do you prioritize with your fact-checking work, with your targeting young people to have them participate? How do you decide what kind of content to interact with, what kind of news to share with them?
Well, you will not reach everything. I see my time limits is coming close, but you have to see what's viral. That's often important. And you need to have contact with the young people. So that's maybe the baseline here. You need to talk with the young people, meet them, and hear what's important for them. Because it's really easy for adults to tell what is important. We need to see what is important for them. Have you some?
Yeah, I agree. And we also need to think that there's so much information out there, and meeting that information with more information isn't necessarily what we should be doing. We should try to filter out what is actually important for them. But that's a challenge, trying to figure out what is important, but that's what we try to do, rather than just giving them more and more and more and more information all the time.
And that's the good part. Internet never forgets. So if you post something, it will still come back to you. But then we are out of time. Thank you. And please keep on the conversation. Thank you.